What's up? How you guys doing? Well, let's hear it again for SPI for hosting this event. This is an incredible space. Give it up for them. Great job, guys. Amazing. I'm joined on stage with three titans of industry here, just complete legends, and I want to give them all their flowers and all the time in the world to talk about the awesome products that they're building. Jarry, why don't we start with you? I know, Ellipsis does a lot on Solana, right? Namely, and most famously, I should say, is Phoenix currently. But you also have spent a ton of time in the market-making space. Would love to just get a quick rundown as to what you're building and why perps on-chain specifically today matter most.
Yeah, so I'm Jarry. I'm one of the co-founders of Ellipsis Labs. And if I wanted to summarize what my company does in one sentence, it's we build market structure on Solana. We spent the bulk of the time of our company building in spot. So we started with Phoenix V1, which is a spot limit order book that's fully settled on Solana. And then we moved into the prop AMM space, really pioneering that new era of market structure on Solana with SolFi. Today, we're focused on moving some of our learnings from the spot space in Solana into perps. So we're building Phoenix V2 or Phoenix Perps, which is a fully on-chain perpetuals platform.
Awesome. Tom, I know that DoubleZero has gotten actually a lot of play here today, and I want to talk a little bit about sort of the nature of the network that you guys are building outside of course, the network that we're all here to talk about, which is Solana, and how that interacts. Would love to just get a quick rundown from you on that.
For sure. So DoubleZero is a high-performance network, purpose-built for crypto. That sentence alone is probably filled with buzzwords. So the way to think about this conceptually, right, when you're interacting with a blockchain, your transaction request goes through the public internet pipe. But the internet service providers don't allow a user to carve out priority or to say that my sort of transaction is more urgent than someone's text message. So traditional markets have perfected this model by having dedicated piping in and out of exchanges. So the problem with a crypto system is there's no one exchange, right? There's 890 Solana validators anywhere in the world. You can't create one line to those validators. So DoubleZero solves the problem of how do you create consistent and really fast connectivity in and out of a validator, and our network is effectively a global network that connects today 50% of Solana stake over a variety of different cables, and we can get into the structure, but your main takeaway is we try to make Solana go really, really fast.
That's awesome. So we're going to see a Flash Boys sequel from you soon?
Potentially.
Ooh, usually that's directed towards me,
right.
so
I'll be your
really happy it's going to somebody else.
Rebecca, obviously, Jito is so central to the story of Solana.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, what do you think is unique about Solana that enabled Jito to build all of the amazing products that you have? And of course, BAM being the most recent, for those who don't know, block assembly marketplace, essentially modular ordering structures, and some of the only verifiable, or I guess to appease Jarry, let's call it verifiable ordering on-chain.
Yeah, just listening to everybody and thinking about it in the context of Solana, everybody's basically saying, like, rebuild market infrastructure for Solana. And I think Solana is very much purpose-built for internet capital markets, right? This on-chain NASDAQ as it was originally ideated. And one of the Jito Labs founders, Lucas Bruder, our CEO, just put out something about the market layer manifesto, about how there are lots of different pieces that make up Solana as being particularly apt to build the future of finance here, as we all like to say, but really to bring things like we're seeing, like perpetuals on-chain and other types of familiar financial assets. I think the speed is really important as part of Solana, but you can't just rely on speed alone. You need something like verifiability and transparency and auditability. That's something that BAM gives, right? So you make sure that the order that comes out of the BAM nodes is settled to the validators in a way. That's what financial institutions need. People who are, trading perpetuals or other types of traditional financial instruments need. And you also need customizability and privacy, and all of that is being built into Solana in different ways. I think the Solana Foundation is doing a great job putting out information on privacy and how that's being built into Solana. You guys had your second in your series come out today, just to give you guys a little shout. But also BAM allows for customizability both through plugins and also through different types of whitelisting or white labeling, which will leave Solana permissionless at its core, but allow people to use Solana as they see fit.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to double click on that, Jarry. I know, as you're building, completely on-chain perp stacks, there are certain challenges that you have to navigate. Would love to kind of understand what's different about Phoenix as it compares to its competitors, but more specifically, like what about building it completely on-chain is challenging, but also what does that actually unlock? What value does that create?
I think the #1 unlock of building something like Phoenix on-chain versus on a centralized controlled platform is we have, or anyone who uses the platform has the full capability to audit all the transactions and all the fills and all the transactions. This is far more transparency than any venue in traditional finance, any centralized exchange. You can look at the code and you can verify line by line what it's doing. I think that's really powerful. Another reason why building on Solana is powerful is you can leverage the existing capital that exists on the chain already. Solana has been around for quite a long time at this point, and it's accrued a lot of real assets on the chain, and those real assets could be used to work. Expressing positions on like different assets is like one way in which you can deploy that capital in an effective way. And so we think Phoenix solves that problem. But like you mentioned, Ramzy, this comes with an associated set of problems. I think building on chain is a relatively challenging endeavor. As a developer, you're dealing with these very tough constraints. Because the blocks are operating in such a short amount of time, you need to make sure that the software is written in a very low latency, high throughput way. The computation needs to be very efficient to perform all these actions. And when you're performing calculations like margin in this sort of environment, you need to be very conscious of how much compute is available at a given point in time. So that's purely from a technical perspective. There's a lot of challenges you need to solve there to make sure that the underlying machine for the perps exchange is functional. From the perspective of running on a blockchain, we talked about ordering. Ordering is a thing that is very difficult to think about and consider when you're building leveraged products. The network is operated by decentralized validators, which means that at any given point in time, the node or the machine that's executing the transactions of the chain could be geographically anywhere in the world. One moment they can be in Europe, they can be in Asia, they can be in North America. This is a consideration that traders need to understand when they're interacting with a platform like Phoenix, and that also means that Phoenix as a platform has to be robust to this rotating leader schedule. Another problem of this is the leader at the time of producing the block can decide the ordering of transactions for all of the smart contracts that are on chain. And if you're trading, this is another thing that's very difficult to anticipate and to plan for, because that means that the leader of the block can determine what order your places and cancels come in, what order the trades get executed in, what order the liquidations, what are the liquidations executed in the first place, or what order they get executed in. I think this is a big challenge for Solana moving forward. And one thing that we think Solana is moving towards in the long term is a way to make sure that the order in the block is actually deterministic and verifiable. And that allows us to introduce this new market structure where not only do you have decentralized execution, trustless execution, and the ability to inherit this new capital layer, you can also set the ground rules for how executions for these financial transactions take place.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredibly important. And you touch on three things there that I think actually relate quite intimately to what Rebecca and Tom are working on, namely, speed, first of all, and ensuring that these transactions are propagated at a comparable speed regardless of where the leader is at any given time. Tom, I know that you guys are spending a lot of effort trying to essentially decentralize, or I should say rather like expand the coverage of incredibly latency sensitive fiber across the globe. Could you talk to us about kind of how pushing towards underserved, underrepresented areas has improved DoubleZero as a product for folks like Jarry?
Sure. So we talk about validators are a permissionless action. Anyone can spin up a validator. But the challenge with validators is they need to get information from other validators to complete the chain. So if you're running a validator as just an upstart and you get some stake and you're looking at a place where you want to ultimately run your node, chances are you're going to co-locate among other validators because that is the highest likelihood that you'll get information fast. Now, in a one-off scenario, that isn't a problem. But at scale, what you get are these pockets of areas across the globe where there is a ton of concentration of stake. So if we look at Amsterdam and Frankfurt as two regions, they're very popular. Now, what isn't intuitive immediately is Amsterdam and Frankfurt have great connectivity, and they're low cost initially to spin up. But if you had somebody on the front foot say, hey, I want to go move my validator to an underserved region, they're sort of sacrificing connectivity and performance for the greater good of decentralization on the network. But any blockchain is only as good as its slowest performing node. So what DoubleZero aimed to put together is part of our delegation program is to say, we will run links, our contributors will provide fiber connectivity to specific regions. And what that allows for, even in the case of Sao Paulo in Brazil, now you no longer need to deal with the nuances of South American internet routing rules as you're trying to go from Brazil to Tokyo. Instead, that validator who wants to decentralize the network can locate in Brazil, connect into the DoubleZero network, and have low latency connectivity in and out of other validators. One thing I just want to say is like validators certainly receive transactions, and that's when we care about them. But also the job isn't done. Once that finishes, they have information that needs to be communicated either to other validators or to market participants. So one of the things we're focusing on DoubleZero is to say, how can we collectively as a network get information back out to market participants? Typically in the form of shreds as an object a validator produces. But if you are a market maker, if you're a trader, if you're running a perps exchange, if you're doing anything, you want to know what just traded. So the DoubleZero network is a two-way street in that respect.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what you want, right? If you're going to try and decentralize this notion of an exchange, you can't, at some points have incredibly fast, reliant systems, and then as soon as the leader switches to the other side of the globe, like the service quality drops off. And so that's yeah, I think it's incredibly important that we focus on that. Two other things Jarry mentioned that I think are important here are the decentralization and also the verifiability of transaction ordering. So Rebecca, I know that BAM currently has plans to decentralize the subset of builders that can run BAM nodes. Could you talk to us kind of about that process and what you think it unlocks in terms of value for the ecosystem?
Yeah. So a couple things on that. One, just to key off something Tom was saying, and just as I was thinking about it and thinking about what we're talking about in the context of this conference, co-location, connectivity, routers, all of that stuff, that exists in traditional finance today. The thing that is different about what we're all building is that we all work together all the time as we are building out something new. So the ability to make sure everybody's building towards decentralizing stake, making sure this remains permissionless, but specific for what people's needs are in terms of how they're transacting on chain, I think is what makes us all really different. But we've all been so involved in thinking about and talking about the tech for so long that we forget that like a lot of this is what happens in traditional finance today. I thought a lot about it in the context of MEV or transaction ordering generally. But to get to your question on decentralizing BAM nodes, that's happening over time. Because BAM stake is growing and growing over time, we want to ensure that this new network, which is pretty different, is well on its way and all the kinks are worked out, and that we are integrated with all the different clients to be able to move this forward. And then ensuring that the BAM nodes and the way they're operating have everything they need as it starts moving out to other people, whether it be in the right regions or with different operators. So decentralization is a process. And people, we thought about it for many, many years, just to put my legal hat on for 1 second, as like a policy issue, but it really is a technological and operational issue from a security perspective, right? Like, obviously, most of the issues that happen in traditional finance today are because either there's a centralized entity that's a honeypot for data, or you have a centralized server that goes down. But the whole beauty of what we're building is something very similar, but that will have a lot of operational resilience in a way that traditional finance does not. Was the other question about verifiability?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so the thing that will happen with the BAM nodes is that there will be audit trails that are emitted by the BAM nodes, especially as they become more decentralized. And that will allow people to see if the order of the transactions as they come out of the BAM nodes are exactly how they are settled. And so I think it will increase accountability, but in a totally decentralized way. And especially from a base layer infrastructure perspective, I think tech is the best way to bring accountability forward, because we really don't want to be regulating or imposing policy onto base layer infrastructure providers.
Jarry, I know that, so as you're building towards kind of scaling out Phoenix and getting a lot more activity on the perp decks, what do the next 12 months look like for you, and how can you, or I guess how is your team positioning themselves in a way to kind of build on the momentum that's come before you in some respects?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it's kind of the biggest one that we're solving day to day is how do you take this platform and bootstrap it from the ground up? I think there's a few metrics that we care a lot about. The first two are going to be volume and open interest. Basically, it's just tracking how much activity is there on the platform and how many people are actually taking on long-lasting positions on the different assets that are offered on the platform. I think in terms of growth, one thing that I think crypto does a very poor job of is tracking what looks like organic growth versus growth that is tracking hype, or just trying to use the product in the early stages for some short-term reward. I think this is relatively antithetical to growing like a real exchange, like a real venue of exchange. I think the purpose of a venue of exchange is for people to actually take on positions and express their beliefs through the market. And that is something that grows over time. And I think there's organic users who want to express these preferences. So one thing that we're really targeting is organic users that want to use the platform for the sake of using the platform, rather than people who are using the platform for the purposes of farming short-term incentives. And so that's another metric that we're really trying to track closely, which is how many people who are organic users of the platform, really interested in like putting on trades and positions, and less interested in short-term incentive farming. But the long-term goal that we're working towards is how do we figure out how to grow volume and open interest. I think the two tactical things that we can do here is how do we grow liquidity, so reaching out to professional market makers to try to provide deep type quotes on Phoenix. I think we attempt to do this by providing relatively favorable conditions for market makers on the platform. This involves things like ensuring that their quotes are landing reliably, and also making sure that when they're providing the quotes, they have like adequate advantages on the exchange level to make sure that they're privy to avoiding toxicity from other market participants. The other avenue is just making sure that we have the ability to reach parity to other similar platforms like Hyperliquid or Lighter or even Binance. Because ultimately the goal here is how do you reach these existing markets of people who are providing flow to perps exchanges. Everything comes down to flow at the end of the day. Like, where does the order flow come from? What are they interested in trading? And then if you can find a way to capture that flow and that volume, then the rest will come flowing back to it. So from us, it's a multifaceted play. We need to think about the markets from both directions, from the maker side and the taker side. And we need to understand how capital flows throughout crypto as this financial ecosystem.
It looks like you have a busy 12 months ahead of you. Sounds fun, though. Tom, I know that the kind of the future that yourself and Austin and the rest of your team have been striving for is really this like high performance dedicated internet, right, for blockchains at large. I'm wondering, in your mind, what happens once you achieve that vision? Like, what actually unlocks on Solana, for instance, that is not possible today?
Sure. I think a few things. One is like the DoubleZero network, DoubleZero Foundation, the protocol doesn't own any of the cables. It's not like we're going out there and leasing some of these subsea fiber cables or subterranean, right? We have a network of contributors that identify links or straight line connections between city pairs that are causing crypto traffic not to work, essentially, right? So if I think about like, what will DoubleZero unlock? I think a few things. Like, you take a traditional market and you ask anybody at a hedge fund and you say, hey, how long is it going to take you to trade a Tesla stock? And they know from the moment they generate alpha until the moment the trade gets executed, and they can calculate that window. Yep. And that window then becomes the amount of time they need to effectively come up with an idea and execute on it. In crypto, we have no shortage of venues and no shortage of alpha, but what we do have a tremendous shortage of is predictability. Depending on where you are physically and where the validator leader is will impact how long it takes you to do things. So if DoubleZero has done its job well, we will effectively give institutions, like retail users, all participants, a better sense of predictability on actions. Meaning if I want to move this amount of, if I want to conduct this transaction, I have a pretty good understanding of how long it's going to take me to do that, irrespective of where the validator node is that's ultimately processing that information. And the same is true on the way out as well. So depending on who you are and where you're located and where you're trading, your access to market data is fractured. Like, let's take a step back. Like, centralized systems work incredibly well because they have one location. We know how to get data in, or excuse me, we know how to get trades in, execute a trade, and we know how to get data out. We're trying to replicate that localized model globally. It creates a lot of friction. So if we do a great job, execution gets faster on Solana, market data gets quicker, and hopefully block times can speed up.
That'd be great. Rebecca, I guess to close things off, you spoke a little bit about internet capital markets at the beginning of the talk. I want to kind of come full circle and ask you, like, what do you think is still like required, maybe a couple missing pieces to realize like the ICM vision on Solana, and where does Jito come into play?
What everybody is doing on this panel is
right.
really what we need. But in all seriousness, though, like, it is really the building blocks. And I actually read Flash Boys maybe 18 months, 2 years ago, and it was really about, for anybody who hasn't read it, it's about the birth of high-frequency trading and alternative trading systems, so alternative trading systems to national securities exchanges in the United States. And if you really look at the way that the base layer infrastructure on Solana works, which, you know, we're at a Wall Street by Washington or Washington by Wall Street panel, you know, people are thinking at a much higher level, but when you're really looking at the base layer infrastructure and what we're building, it very much mimics a lot of what went on to build how we think of the financial system today and how fast it is. And so for internet capital markets, we definitely need Phoenix V2, Phoenix Perps. We definitely need DoubleZero to be widely adopted and widely used. And we need BAM to be even more robust and with more stake going through so that people, especially from a financial institution's perspective, can use Solana with all the things they're used to, right? Financial integrity, customizability, privacy, certainty or verifiability in transaction ordering. And I think the one thing that we haven't talked about on this panel and that gets lost, especially when you think about competitors like Hyperliquid and things like that, you are gonna have transparency on Solana, which is not true in every other trading venue, including a lot of them that are used or lauded today. And I think that is something else. Like, you can still have privacy on Solana, but at the base layer, you're gonna have the transparency, and that is something that is going to keep Solana being different and special and new for the way that our markets are gonna be built from here on out.
Awesome. All right. Well, appreciate you guys sticking around for the panel, and thank you for my lovely 3 panelists. Appreciate it.
Sure.